this is the creation soliloquy. And he's like, oh, Frankenstein, kind creature, how I despair upon killing you. And then Walton comes in and is like, foul beast, you wretch. If you despaired, why did you do it? Oh, you think I didn't know that? You think that I like killing? Well, let me tell you how I feel about that.
Well, speaking of body parts, shall we?
Yeah. I wish I had a Swiss doctor who could just make me a new oversized elbow.
You know where that ends. Like, you and everyone you love is dead.
In the North Pole.
Yeah, right. I know.
It ends on the North Pole.
Do you think the Coen brothers have read this book?
Oh, I'm sure.
It's got the same sort of like, there's only one direction that this goes kind of feel to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got that sort of a simple man sort of retelling of Job kind of quality. But so this is part 2 of Frankenstein. And when we let off, we were in the middle of the creations narrative, which is being related by Frankenstein to Walton, who is then writing this down and sending it to his sister, Margaret, I think, or Elizabeth. I know there's not Elizabeth. We do have the 2 wasp names in this novel, Margaret and Elizabeth. So the creation tells a story of the family he's observing. It's this bizarre, weird story.
It's another story. It's another frame.
Another frame, and it's this bizarre sort of 1001 night story of a rescued Turk prisoner and his daughter, and a betrayal, and it's kind of hard to follow. But what eventually happens is the creation is watching this family, and he begins to really admire them and like them, and he sees how kind they are with one another, and he yearns for that kindness. So he goes and talks to the old man who's blind, and the old man is actually very kind to him and says, if you should just show yourself to whoever it is that you want to talk to, and I'm sure they'll accept you, no matter what your problem is or your deformity is or whatever it might be. He can't see, but then the kids show up and they're like, oh my God, horrific monster! And they chase him away into the woods. And he is heartbroken and sad. And this is basically the reason he has gone to Frankenstein, and he says, all right, well, Frankenstein, you're the only one, I'm your responsibility. You're the only one who can make me happy. Make me a female monster. I need some monster nookie. I need to get Eld. That's the only thing for it. And Frankenstein is he's somewhat convinced by the creation's he's convinced by the creation's eloquence, but then also the creation's and if you don't do it, I'll kill you and everybody you love. So this is a sort of stick and carrot, and Frankenstein agrees to make a female creation.
Yeah, he agrees, and then, as is the case in this novel, sort of dutifully procrastinates. A lot of time goes by. He decides to head off to England because he thinks that there are some scientists there who can help him out with the female kind of bits and pieces of putting the new creation
has the
together.
Work ethic of a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
exactly. I'll take out the trash this weekend, and then 3 hours later, he's still playing The Legend of Zelda.
100%. Yes, if only that where this story went. But he goes off to England. Henry Clerval comes along with him, but Frankenstein is kind of guilty and doesn't want Henry to see, so he kind of heads off to Scotland, and then they both go to Scotland. Frankenstein heads off to the Orkney Islands, where he works on the female creation. The original creation has, in fact, followed him, as Frankenstein suspects. And while the creation shows himself, Frankenstein decides, I can't go through with this. He destroys the female creation. The original creation vows revenge, saying that he is going to get his revenge on Frankenstein's wedding night. the creation begins his revenge basically that night or in the next couple of days, somehow tracking Henry Clavell down in northern Scotland, which then is also Ireland, kills Clavell. There's this weird subplot where Frankenstein kind of gets like fingered for the murder, but a kind of weirdly kind magistrate works it out for him, sends some messages to his father, and this whole like little section kind of passes by. Frankenstein is freed again, doesn't face any consequences for his actions so far, and begins to head back towards Switzerland in the hopes of marrying his sort of stepsister.
Yes, cousin / stepsister, Elizabeth, who apparently this has been the plan all along. They've always been thought of as betrothed. And, Frankenstein's like, well, I know the creation's likely to take his revenge on the wedding night, but surely this ethical creature is only going to kill me. And I know that would be a bummer for poor Elizabeth, but I'll just arm myself with 2 pistols and that'll be the end of it. Hopefully I'll prevail, but if not, I'll die. But of course, what actually happens is the creation realizes a much more effective way to take revenge on Frankenstein, which is to kill his beloved Elizabeth. And then he escapes. It's a little bit unclear to me if he kills the father and the other brother, or if they just
die of grief. That is basically what happens.
And so then, essentially, so Frankenstein tries to get the magistrate to arrest the creation. The magistrate's sort of like, well, I don't know if I believe you, A, and B, he sounds kind of hard to arrest. So Frankenstein's like, well, if you want something done right. And he sets off on a quest over hill and dale, across sea, over mountains, to track down the creation and kill him. And one has the sense that the creation is sort of goading him along and is like kind of like basically could escape if he really wanted to. But, whenever Frankenstein is tired, the creation will kill a rabbit and leave it for him to eat, or will show himself or leave a clue so that Frankenstein will figure out. So essentially the creation is continuing his revenge by sort of torturing Frankenstein by dragging him along this arduous journey to the ends of the earth.
And eventually, Frankenstein begins to perish himself, and Walton, our original narrator, because now we are finally kind of stepping back to the original frame, has heard this whole sorry tale, and Frankenstein does in fact pass away, and the creation shows up, sees Walton and begins to flee, and like for the first time in the book, a human being kind of treats the creation with some compassion. And Walton even says that he's moved by compassion and has a conversation with the creation. And the creation says that he is in fact like desperately guilty, but there wasn't really anything else that he felt like he could do. And says, okay, well, this is it. I'm going to head off into the wastes and die, where he's going to have a Viking funeral for himself and set himself on fire.
He's going to the North Pole and set himself on fire. And that is the end of the book.
Yep.
So here's my question for you. First question, who do you think understands human nature better, the creation or Victor Frankenstein?
The creation.
What I guess what I probably meant to ask, and this is probably what you answered, is what do you think the author what evidence does the author give us of that?
Yeah, that's great. This is going to kind of come back around to my final question, I think. So we might have some nice congruity, which makes sense with this book because it is a like painfully parallel book. Parallel? I'm not sure if I got that right. The book is kind of like a palindrome.
Well, I mean, there's a very clear foiling.
Absolutely.
That's happening.
Yeah. And so what's odd is that the creation understands human nature better than Dr. Frankenstein because the creation kind of experiences the horror of human nature in real time and in a very compressed, in a single generation. I mean, I think you could, subtitle this book, Frankenstein, or the first accounting of generational trauma. Because basically the creation doesn't learn anything from Frankenstein, and is then sort of set adrift in the world where he really wants to make connections. And what he learns instead is that human beings are desperately willing to allow their first sort of visual impressions to take hold of them. And that ideas of sort of ugliness and horror are meant to be kind of shunned and killed and driven away. And that's why we get the blind man scene, which I think is one of Shelley's really interesting set pieces, because she's okay, how do I get this conversation about human nature going? Oh, I'll make the old man blind. And he has a really good conversation with the old man, but then the kids come back, they see the creation, they freak out, they, run him off. And this is going to kind of get into
I'm just imagining after that too, the old man being I was having a good conversation with that guy. Why did you run him off? And they're like, Dad, you don't understand. He's really ugly.
And the old man is well, so am I. Who cares? It would have been nice to see that, but then of course we get to see the creation goes back to the house, and the family is so horrified by just the appearance of the creation that they break their lease and they have to pay a whole bunch of extra penalties to the landlord to get out of the lease, and they basically take off, and they don't have any money anyway. They're already broke.
Although apparently they have servants, which is so strange.
I know. Yeah, that was great. We had very little, except we had servants.
We could hardly afford the servants' meals. We were so broke.
And so I think, so Frankenstein, he doesn't understand human nature because he's too inside it. It's like the story about the old fish who is the water's great today, boys. And the two young fish are what is water?
Yeah.
And I think in this case, Frankenstein is the two young fish, because he doesn't understand his own nature, and the creation gets this horrible real-time crash course in human nature. And unfortunately, the lesson that he learns, the most prominent piece of human nature that he learns is an eye for an eye.
Yeah. And even he knows it's morally indefensible, which is why he kills himself in the end. And I don't know that the novel offers another plausible path for the creation. I don't know. I mean, it's so strange though, because, you have Walton talks about what a great guy Frankenstein is, and everybody and even the creation is oh, Frankenstein, you're dead. I'm sad. You were so kind-hearted. I'm like, what? The creation has every reason to despise Frankenstein. And yes, he's morally wrong for killing the innocents, and he knows that. But, to me, it seems super clear that if essentially your father despises you because of your appearance, and if you understand love and friendship and compassion, and you desire those things from your fellow humans, and you're willing to extend those things to, well, maybe not fellow humans, I don't know. Is the creation a human? I don't know. But your fellow beings, and you proffer those things, and you are rejected. Frankenstein never seems to understand that anybody would be completely morally destroyed by that.
Yeah.
And whereas he's always you fiend, you demon, he's always belittling and cursing the creation as though all of this is somehow the creation's fault.
Right.
It's all Frankenstein's fault. And I assume that Mary Shelley must intend that, although there are weird elements of the way that it's structured and written too that make me feel like I'm supposed to feel sorry for Frankenstein, and I don't. I do for Elizabeth and for Frankenstein's father, and I guess I feel sorry in the sense that, like, yes, he suffered, but I don't feel like I don't feel like he is this moral person who fell into tragedy. I feel like he is a flawed person who created his
like an
tragedy.
Incredibly flawed person. I mean, I think something you said a few minutes ago really hits it. That like the creation comes into the world with good nature.
Right.
He appears to want friendship and love and connection.
The first thing he does is smile at Frankenstein. Right. Frankenstein's like, "Oh, what a terrible smile!"
But then the nurture part of the creation's experience is horrific and just terrible. And so I did a little digging about this, and apparently, because there are several versions of the novel, and
and we probably read the 1830s.
We read the version I've got the 1830, and that's usually the version that gets tossed around. Apparently, and this makes total sense, the 1818 version is much rawer. I mean, she's a much younger artist. It kind of appeared quickly. You know, there's the ghost story night. Byron and Shelley and Percy Shelley are both probably like, hey, that was pretty good. You should write that down. And in the original, there's much less of Frankenstein's interiority, apparently. All of his sort of young backstory of the, like, going off to school, all the stuff that you and I in the last episode were like, can we skip this? None of that was there. And so I think what you're experiencing is the echo of the 1818 version. Because I really think that Mary Shelley's attitude here is one of approbation for human nature. But then by adding a lot of details about Frankenstein's youth and his schooling and stuff like that, it muddies the water because we do start feeling some sympathy for him, his mom, and all this stuff. And then it's confusing. I think that is probably something that's happening.
I wonder if she read the press and made I wonder if she got bad press and got bad advice, essentially. And that would make sense. And, who would have the moral and the wisdom or even just the awareness to be able to withstand reviews telling you that your novel is too raw at the age of 20 or something like that. That if the people who know that your novel needs, you need to clean up your hero a little bit and give him more of a story, be very hard not to take that advice.
And especially there's sort of a version in the middle where it became known that it was written by a woman, and a lot of the press rescinded their initial positive reviews of the 1818 version, and were like, "Oh, a woman wrote this? It's awful." And I mean, she's Shelley is embedded.
Interesting when they sort of. When it's as though they were the blind man, when they didn't know who she was, they were open to her. But once they beheld her true aspect, suddenly they shunned her.
Who's the protagonist of this book?
I don't know. I think that once the creation starts talking, it or he becomes the protagonist for the entire time that it or he is talking. And that is the best part of the book. But that's only about a quarter of the book. And so structurally, I think you'd have to say that Victor Frankenstein is the protagonist. But that he's not a good protagonist.
What does he learn? How does he change?
Doesn't really. No, he just sort of. I don't know. I mean, maybe you could argue that when he chooses to destroy the second creation and stand up to the monster and stand up to the creation, that's some kind of he's taking action. He's taking some kind of heroic stand. But I personally don't buy it.
Yeah.
To me, it just feels like an extension of what he's been doing in the entire novel, which is avoiding his responsibility to the thing that he creates.
Yeah.
And, like, I think he could choose to destroy the creation. But he sort of mollifies it and says, yeah, I'll make that thing for you. Oh, not really, just kidding. I had my fingers crossed the entire time. I'm going to go marry Elizabeth now, my sister cousin.
Yeah. What could possibly go wrong when you're going to say, I'll see you on your wedding night?
Yeah, he seems to have this, like, that quality of beyond procrastination where, we all know people like this, and we've probably all done this, where there's something that's approaching that's so scary that you don't plan for it at all, because the prospect of planning for it is too overwhelming. And so, and that fear ends up making the thing itself worse. I don't know. I don't really know the answer to your question, but I gave it my best shot. What do you think?
I'm in the same boat as you. I can't put my finger on a protagonist, which makes me continue to head in the direction that this is much more like a morality play. Like this is here for a lesson. Like we're supposed to, and I think the lesson is much more interesting than like a medieval morality play, which tends to be fairly straightforward. But because I do think that Shelley is saying something really interesting about her period, but and this goes to my next question about what do you make of the plotting?
I actually think there's too much plot. There are too many details we don't need. But then there are also these long stretches of dialogue. And actually, the thing that you just said, I was going to do a reading. Maybe I can ask you my question and then give you my answer to it as a way of answering your question about the plotting.
It. Awesome.
So this is like audience, this is like a Mary Shelley type
we're framing our questions.
This is like the arabesque in the middle of the thing. So I'm going to give you my reading or a bit of it. And ask you my question about it, and I think we might land at an answer to your question. So towards the end of the book, there is I enjoy the confrontation between Walton and the creation, and he has just murdered Frankenstein. Walton has confronted him. And Walton has basically said, like, why are you, because he's harassing the monster is, and he said, why are you harassing? Why are you mourning? Maybe you should have realized how bad you would feel about killing Frankenstein before you did that. And the monster or the creation looks at him and said, like, do you think? He's basically like, do you think that I enjoy murdering? And so I'm going to read from there. And he says, and do you dream, said the demon, do you think I was then dead to agony and remorse? Ha, he continued, pointing to the corpse. He suffered not in the consummation of the deed. Oh, not the 10,000th portion of the anguish that was mine during the lingering detail of its execution. A frightful selfishness hurried me on while my heart was poisoned with remorse. Think you that the groans of Clerval were music to my ears? My heart was fashioned to be susceptible of love and sympathy, and when wretched by misery to vice and hatred, it did not endure the violence of the change without torture, such as you cannot even imagine. And then he goes on to say, after the murder of Clerval, I returned to Switzerland, heartbroken and overcome. I pitied Frankenstein. My pity amounted to horror. I abhorred myself, but when I discovered that he, the author at once of my existence, of its unspeakable torments, dared to hope for happiness, that while he accumulated wretchedness and despair upon me, he sought his own enjoyment in feelings and passions from the indulgence of which I was forever banned, then impotent envy and bitter indignation filled me with an insatiable thirst for vengeance. I recollected my threat and resolved that it should be accomplished. I knew that I was preparing myself a deadly torture, but I was the slave, not the master of an impulse which I detested, yet could not disobey.
The poor
First
creation.
of all, that's pretty poetic and lyrical. One of the things I noticed was that throughout this book, the creation and Frankenstein are having a contest about who suffered more. And they both at various times claim to be the one who has suffered more. And there's another quote from Frankenstein where he's talking with Elizabeth or talking to his father, and he says, "Nobody has suffered as much as I have," or something like that. And I'm curious how that lands for you and how that and again, I think we're going to work towards an answer to your last question. How do you think these passages where the creation and Frankenstein are lyrically describing their suffering for a very long time, and they feel like they're really yearning in these moments to be understood by whoever they're speaking with in that moment too. How does that land with you, and how do you think the early 19th century reader would have understood that? Yeah,
that's a good question. I mean, so when Frankenstein is doing it, I'm like, oh my God, you are so arrogant and selfish. Because this is all Frankenstein's doing. But he continues to only think about himself. He doesn't, for some reason, he doesn't suspect that the monster is going to kill Elizabeth, even though he has just done the exact same thing to the monster. And so I think,
and you're right. He's not only hideous to the monster, he's also very irresponsible with regard to his friends.
Oh my God.
And I mean, and every now and then he'll talk about that as a setup for how much he's suffering from the guilt of it.
In a way, the creation is exactly suited to Frankenstein as a parent. Frankenstein's first act is to abandon the creation. Oh shit, I made this thing and it's horrifying. I'm out of here. And he continues to make so many decisions about him for himself instead of making decisions for others, like the creation. And of course, that's what the creation learns. I think that is a wild thing for, to appear in the early 19th century in England. And I wonder if the audience picked up on it. And I think that some of the backlash once it's discovered that it's a woman who wrote it is very telling. Because I could imagine all of a sudden oh wait, this is not a novel about man aping God. This is a real critique of the way that we do patriarchy, of parenting. So the creation's rage and its own selfishness is simply a reflection of Frankenstein's. Like I said earlier, this book is quite balanced. It's something we've always talked about. There is a blood price that you have to pay when you do something that is out of bounds, basically. And it's, I wish the book were shorter and sharper. I really think that because the ideas are just great. And the question that I had for you about plot is that there's so many moments when it just feels like Frankenstein is being borne along on a series of very improbable events. What is Clerval doing somewhere near the place, the Orkneys, that just happens to be where Frankenstein is going to drift to after a night of dumping the female creation. And like, there's just a lot of things like that where you can kind of see Shelley being like, oh, I need a set piece for the next thing.
Yeah. Well, so here's my theory.
Yeah.
Which is those long lyrical passages, they really bothered me. And I liked the creations better, although I'm like, why are they both talking about who suffered so much?
Yeah.
Like why? And it's and even, the creation at the end, I do sort of pity him more, and I'm glad for the opportunity to hear that he has remorse for his evil deeds, and that he recognizes them as evil deeds, and that he also feels, he sort of like that. He doesn't see a way out for himself. So I don't mind it, but I don't mind it as much as I do with Frankenstein. But there are just long passages in this book where characters. I was making fun of it with Dracula a little bit, where it's like, oh, the horror of the horrificness, and there's like way more in this book than in Dracula. And one of the things I like about Dracula and A Study in Scarlet, which we just read better, is the plot and also the relationships between the characters and the way they interact, and their dialogue feels more naturalistic.
Totally.
Feels more realistic, even though Dracula is a supernatural novel. It has a kind of, there's a sort of vampire physics that it kind of enumerates and sticks to, and there are certain, Dracula can't cross water and he has to rest during the day and all of these other things. And I think the conclusion I came to is that I think that at this stage in the novel, the audiences are more used to plays than novels. And that these are sort of more like soliloquies, or they're like operatic anguish songs in an opera. And I think both an opera and a tragedy are genres that the audience is more familiar with. And so there are these sort of moments where I'm going to mime for a second, where it's sort of like, this is the creation soliloquy. And he's like, oh, Frankenstein, kind creature, how I despair upon killing you. And then Walton comes in and is like, foul beast, you wretch, if you despaired, why did you do it? Oh, you think I didn't know that? You think that I like killing? Well, let me tell you how I feel about that. And that is that she's tapping into this theatric convention that the audience is more used to, and I think therefore it's less annoying.
Yeah.
I think in the 19th century, and I think by the time you get to the end of by the time you get to the end of the 19th century into the 20th century, the novel has modernized, and we're like, oh no, like dialogue and internality and naturalism is a thing that you can do with a novel, and you can show people's relationships to one another as they actually are.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of why the plot is so crappy.
Right.
Is it's exactly what you said, is that the plot isn't really what audiences are reading for. The plot is sort of like, like the plot of Hamlet doesn't make that much sense, like the plot of Turandot doesn't make that much sense. The plot of Medea doesn't make that much sense. The plot of Oedipus doesn't make that much sense, but you just got to get him to that moment where he shows up on stage, with the mask of his eyes gouged out, and he gives his soliloquy, because that's what the audience is there for. Yeah. And I think that she's writing soliloquies, essentially, or operatic or lyrical passages, and then she just has to craft enough plot in between those things to set those things up. And the expectation is, well, it's just fantasy anyway, so it doesn't really have to make that much sense. You know? Even though there are some kind of occasionally good moments, like the moment where he first fetches up in Ireland is kind of, and he's like, is this English hospitality? And the man is like, well, I wouldn't know because you fetched up in Ireland, haven't you? And that's kind of a fun little moment like that. But those are few and far between. And I feel like you get way more of those with Dracula and A Study in Scarlet. Like, think of all the great little interactions between the protagonists of those novels and like various working class blokes,
Totally. Yeah.
or foppish upper class, fellows that they encounter in various situations.
Yeah, she keeps using, like, you can really see her struggling with, like, narrative sleight of hand. She's like the number of times that Frankenstein falls into, like, mad fits that are 2 and 3 months long that kind of give the narrative a little time to breathe. And he's
basically falls into a fever and has to be nursed back to health. And then
also
exactly, the vesting beat sort of.
Like, time passing is always like 2 months passed, and then we spent 3 months in London, and then, and she's just, you can just kind of feel her being like, I think what you just said is great, where it's like she's having trouble with the scene changes.
Yeah.
And the thing is like, what is so wonderful about Elizabethan and then, 18th, 19th century theater is they just hand waved it, like, you're like, okay, sweet. Like, Hamlet needs to be, like, on a frozen plain, like, seeing the Norwegian army. Let's put a sheet up there and he'll just pretend, and it's magical because it's the words that matter. And she's doing this very hybrid thing. And also, like, she's also hanging out with two of the greatest romantic poets of all time.
Yeah.
So
and it's a mixed bag, right? Because on the one hand, probably it's their influence that inspires her to write this novel, which is a good thing. But I also, like, this is a writer who needs better mentors.
Yeah.
I think, and this is the only novel she wrote, right? Did she write anything else that was a novel?
I think so. Yes, I don't have it on the top of my head, but I do think she's got some other stuff. But I could be. I
honestly
corrected.
don't know the answer to it. But my understanding was that sort of like after this, she had some kids. Mm-hmm. And mostly focused on raising her kids. Mm-hmm. And then she died young, right?
Pretty young. I mean, most of her children, 3 out of her 4 children die. Percy dies. Yeah. Everyone dies. Yeah. It's everyone dies. Not a happy existence.
It's sad, and you can see such raw imaginative talent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
totally.
You can see such a capacity for empathy and emotional insight into humanity, mm-hmm. and an insight that's unusual, mm-hmm. and kind of feminist, maybe, although not. I mean, you wouldn't call this a feminist novel, but you could the creation is sort of an oppressed class, mm-hmm. Like a working class person, at one point he refers to the prejudice that everybody has against him, and the blind man doesn't know. When he's talking to the blind man, and does the blind man, might be guessing that he has dark skin right now, mm-hmm. or that he is a Jew, or that he's a leper or something like that. But he doesn't sound like a woman. But a lot of what the creation is experiencing, not being seen for the qualities that are very much a part of his being, kindness, love, intelligence, lyricism, persuasiveness, eloquence, and those being meaningless to everybody once they get a gander of his apparently very ugly mug. And I guess 8 feet tall is off-putting, mm-hmm. But still, that it seems like that there's some insight into the plight of many oppressed classes, including women, that she's reaching for there, and it feels tragic to me. I mean, it's great that this is a good thing to have done with her talent, and we are better off for this novel, and it's a great idea, and it has lingered in our imaginations and been retold many, many times, but it's also, in my mind, kind of a flawed hybrid piece of work, and I would have wanted to see what she could have done, with some good editors and some good mentors and some good encouragement.
100%.
As she aged.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, I think we get so many incredibly important ideas about it, like the arrogance of creation. I think is like, and not just the creation of other living things, but just creation in general. And, you know, I mean, you could take it, you could run really far with this. Like if you wanted to put like an atheist or an agnostic, like critical interpretation of this novel, you could. That's probably pushing things a little too far in terms of who Shelley was, but like, we could be talking about just like the arrogance of the Judeo-Christian, you know, tradition. Like you could take it that far. What I think is really great about the novel is that it will fit many different readings of, like you just said, of oppressed people, and that really takes the arrogance of their oppressors into account. And it kind of leads into my final question. We've sort of been batting it around a little bit. You know, I mean, we've talked a bunch about tone before, that tone is the author's attitude towards his or her subject matter. And I have to go turn off something on the stove. So while I go do that, my question is, what is the subject matter? And what is Shelley's attitude about it?
Okay. Good, because I'll need time to think about that. Okay, well, I'll try to say something a little bit new. And then I'm going to share a reading and tell you what I conclude from that reading. So one answer to your question is that perhaps the subject matter is actually parenthood, parents and children, you know, what Turgenev might call fathers and sons, and that Frankenstein is a father and the creation is a child. And this is a story about what happens when a parent neglects its creation, their creation. And I certainly think you could make that interpretation. But I think there's something else going on, despite my sort of attraction to the idea that, you know, Mary Shelley's particularly arrogant father, William Godwin, I do think he's an inspiration, likely, for Frankenstein, but I don't necessarily really think the subject matter is parenting. And so, as evidence, I'm going to do another reading.
Awesome.
This is Frankenstein is sick in Walton's ship, and they're stuck on the ice. And the crew of the ship, some of them have already died of exposure. Walton's is sailing for, you know, fortune and glory, essentially, trying to reach the North Pole. And the crew are sort of sick of it. They don't want to die. They don't want to freeze to death. And they are trying to extract a promise from the captain that if the ice opens up to the south, that they will return back to Arkhangelsk, Russia, and, you know, give up this quest for the North Pole. The crew has come in and they've talked to the captain about it. He's not sure what to say. And Frankenstein is lying in bed and weak, but he kind of like sits up full of energy and he addresses the crew and he says, "What do you mean? What do you demand of your captain? Are you then so easily turned from your design? Did you call this a glorious expedition? And wherefore was it glorious? Not because the way was smooth and placid as a southern sea, but because it was full of dangers and terror. Because at every new incident your fortitude has to be called forth and your courage exhibited, because danger and death surround it. And these you were brave and overcome. For this was it glorious. For this was it an honorable undertaking. You are hereafter to be hailed as the benefactors of your species. Your names adored as belonging to brave men who encountered death for honor and the benefit of mankind. And now, behold, with the first imagination of danger, or if you will, the first mighty and terrific trial of your courage, you shrink away and are content to be handed down as men who had not strength enough to endure cold and peril. And so, poor souls, they were chilly and returned to their warm firesides. Why, that requires not this preparation. Ye need not to have come thus far and dragged your captain to the shame of a defeat merely to prove yourselves cowards. Oh, be men, or be more like men. Be steady to your purpose and firm as rock. This ice is not made of such stuff as your hearts may be. It is mutable and cannot withstand you if you say that shall not. Do not return to your families with the stigma of disgrace marked on your brows. Return as heroes who have fought and conquered, who know not what it is to turn their backs on the foe. And this part I think is really important. He spoke this with a voice so modulated to the different feelings expressed in his speech, with an eye so full of lofty design and heroism, that can you wonder that these men were moved? They looked at one another and were unable to reply. I spoke. I told them to retire and consider of what had been said. I would not lead them farther north if they strenuously desired the contrary, but that I hoped that, with reflection, their courage would return. So I think it's really important that Frankenstein is the one who makes this speech. Mm-hmm. And I think that Walton is impressed, as are his crew. And this is kind of like the last thing that Frankenstein does before dying. Yeah. And so I think it's one of those things where this character has seemed so weak and kind of unoppressive, and then you realize, Mary Shelley is giving him charisma. Mm-hmm. I think the subject of the novel then is creation, exploration, seeking greatness. And I think it's about the ambivalence of our attraction to exploration and creation, because in this moment, I do think that Frankenstein is meant to be seen as admirable in a way, or at least he's inspiring. Mm-hmm. He's stirred the courage of these sailors, but at the same time, the sailors kind of have a point. It's not worth dying on just to not go to the North Pole. Mm-hmm. What does Frankenstein's desire to create get him?
Right. Has he made one solid decision? Have we ever seen Frankenstein make a solid, productive decision in this novel? And I don't think we do.
Right.
I read that passage and I was like, oh my God, he hasn't learned a goddamn thing.
He hasn't learned a goddamn thing, but I think that putting it in Walton's point of view is also it reminds me a little bit of Ripley's Game. It's Mary Shelley's way of acknowledging her own and maybe all of our attraction to the man of action, to the creator, to the bold explorer, to the scientist who wants to pull back the curtain of God's great design, and to recognize that there's something attractive about that and exciting about that, and maybe even admirable about it. But that when that exists, I guess the tone of voice is when that exists without any self-reflection or wisdom, it becomes extremely dangerous.
Yeah, man. If that was her intent, then she's fucking awesome, and I believe you. And the reason that I think that it really does work in that reading, just like you said, is that we've now moved back to Walton's narration. So we are getting to see Frankenstein not in his own first-person perspective. And so that allows us a little bit more distance to be moved, and also to be like, but wait, we know what happens when this guy gets ambitious. Like, that's not good. And so, I mean, if that's what is going on, then the ideas aspect of this novel gets even more amazing.
It is perfectly relevant to our time.
Oh yeah.
It is. I'm going to try to find something.
Okay.
And if I can't find it in a minute, I'll give it up.
Okay.
But I have something I want to read to you
Awesome.
if I can find it. I know I have it somewhere in this house. I read this a year or two ago, and then I recently purchased it. This is Jurassic Park, the novel, 1989 or 90? 1990.
Wow, they got that from novel to film real fast.
Well, the film came out in 96.
Is it 96? Okay.
or 95 or 96. 95. I think.
Okay,
I think
that
it's
makes
95.
a little more sense. For some reason, my brain is thinking 93, which seems too fast.
Okay. Okay. So this is a moment of in Jurassic Park. Dr. Ian Malcolm has been gravely wounded by the T-Rex, and he's like lying, being tended at the lodge. Got some morphine going into him, and he's kind of lecturing everybody. Ellie, the Dr. Statler, says, "You don't think much of Arnold, do you?" Arnold's one of the engineers. He's all right. He's an engineer. Wu's the same. They're both technicians. They don't have intelligence. They have what I call thin intelligence. They see the immediate situation. They think narrowly, and they call it being focused. They don't see the surround. They don't see the consequences. That's how you get an island like this, from thin-intelligent thinking, because you cannot make an animal and not expect it to act alive, to be unpredictable, to escape. But they don't see that. Don't you think it's just human nature, Ellie said. God, no, Malcolm said. That's like saying scrambled eggs and bacon for breakfast is human nature. It's nothing of the sort. It's uniquely Western training, and so much of the rest of the world is nauseated by the thought of it. He winced in pain. The morphine's making me philosophical. You want some water? No. I'll tell you the problem with engineers and scientists. Scientists have an elaborate line of bullshit about how they are seeking to know the truth about nature, which is true, but it's not what drives them. Nobody is driven by extractions, like seeking truth. Scientists are actually preoccupied with accomplishment, so they are focused on whether they can do something. They never stop to ask if they should do something. They conveniently decline such considerations as pointless. If they don't do it, somebody else will. Discovery, they believe, is inevitable, so they just try to do it first. That's the game in science. Even pure scientific discovery is an aggressive, penetrative act. It takes a big equipment and it literally changes the world afterward. Particle accelerators scar the land and leave radioactive byproducts. Astronauts leave trash on the moon. There's always some proof that scientists were there making their discoveries. Discovery is always a rape of the natural world. Always.
Yeah, we could be 100% talking about Dr. Victor Frankenstein.
Yeah, and what made me go back to this book is the research I'm doing into artificial intelligence right now. And this is also why I still think Jurassic Park might be Steven Spielberg's worst movie, because this is the speech that we then just get like leather jacketed, Jeff Goldblum being like, "What you call progress, I call the rape of the natural world."
Yeah, they boil it down to...
It's boiled down to such a point where it just becomes aphorism and not particularly... worse than aphorism, cliche. And this Malcolm is making a really interesting point. There's also a huge digression here about why it's important that martial arts take 30 years to master. And he's like, because by the time you master it, you'll be in your 50s and you no longer will commit pointless violence. There's a reason that, we shouldn't have martial artists in their teens or 20s.
We shouldn't send, 16-year-olds to natural philosophy schools at Ingolstadt and encourage them to get a chemistry set and stitch together a cadaver.
Yeah, I mean, and there's another thing in here too where he talks about how the scientists, I'll see if I can find it, but it's this whole thing about how scientists are always, all they have to do is take whatever the last scientist did and add one element to, and they get to be the creator or the creation. They're just constantly benefiting from the science that's come before. It's really profound. And, I'm not anti-science and I'm not anti-discovery. But Mary Shelley and Michael Crichton seem to be having a conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think they're both wary about what happens when you cross human nature with discovery. Yeah.
And what I think Ian Malcolm, who I think is Crichton's mouthpiece, and Mary Shelley both seem to be indicating too, I don't know, I mean, maybe this is my own overlay, is it's not what's dangerous What's particularly dangerous is to do that without any kind of self-reflection and with a system of thought that privileges the idea that doing so is admirable and glorious, and maybe that's why we get, Frankenstein's speech to the sailors in the end too. I
love that reading. And, I think that was a really nice way to answer that question. It gets us to what is the sense of her tone. And I think you got it.
Well, shall we go to trivia?
Let's go to trivia. You are the host.
Yeah. Okay. So, as you mentioned, Mary Shelley got some bad reviews for this novel. Here's a quote from one of them that you might have also seen. We need scarcely say that these volumes have neither principle, object, nor moral. The horror which abounds in them is too grotesque and bizarre ever to approach near the sublime, and when we did not hurry over the pages in disgust, we sometimes paused to laugh outright, and yet we suspect that the diseased and wandering imagination, which has stepped out of all legitimate bounds to frame these disjointed combinations and unnatural adventures, might be disciplined into something better. The writer of it is, we understand, a female. This is an aggravation of that which is the prevailing fault of the novel. But if our authoress can forget the gentleness of her sex, it is no reason why we should, and we shall therefore dismiss the novel without further comment. So that was in, I forget which... feel free to find that person's tombstone and urinate on it.
Seriously, what a dick.
But that's all to set up that at least one contemporary reviewer praised the novel. Was the praiser of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It was written in the year, not immediately after publication, probably in the mid to late 1820s. Was that reviewer Lord Byron in a private letter to Sir Thomas More, later published as part of his papers, Sir Walter Scott in Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine, Victor Hugo in the Mercure de France, a French literary journal, or Clarence Niven, editor of the Yorkshire Quarterly Review.
Good old Clarence Niven.
He's a good bloke. Yeah. He's a Geordie.
Yeah. He's friends with his American cousin Lawrence Niven.
Yeah.
Clarence and Lawrence.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And his great nephew Lawrence Niven.
God, yes, right, of course, yes, yeah. There'd have to be a fair amount of time in between.
Or great nephew, yeah, because this is an old book.
Byron makes sense.
This was an old book when Dracula was written.
Yeah, he was 80 years old by the time that Dracula was written. I mean, it's the same,
It's like The Sun Also Rises in Jurassic Park.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like whatever got written in 1945, to our current era, it's that same stretch of time, which is a big stretch of time. I just really want it to be Victor Hugo, so I'm going to go with Victor Hugo.
It was good old Sir Walter Scott in Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine. Scott ultimately concluded that the work impressed him with a high idea of the author's original genius and happy power of expression, and called it a novel which excites new reflections and untried sources of emotion.
Good for
do
Sir
not
Walter
urinate
Scott.
on Walter Scott's grave. Leave a flower for good old Sir Walter Scott.
Well, you did me a service and you asked me a question about writers. I am going to ask you a question about history. A prominent American politician stayed with the Godwins for a little while during Mary's childhood. Was that prominent American politician Henry Clay, one of the authors of the Missouri Compromise and a U.S. Senator? Was it B, Aaron Burr, third Vice President of the United States and killer of Alexander Hamilton? Or was it C, DeWitt Clinton, U.S. Senator, 10 times Mayor of New York, and loser of the 1812 presidential election to James Madison?
I think Henry Clay would be too young. Also don't know what the hell he'd be doing. there. Aaron Burr is an interesting possibility. As we know from the documentary Hamilton, Aaron Burr was a black man, and and he was a political opportunist. And William Godwin was well known, but I don't think their politics would have really aligned very well. I believe that Burr was relatively comfortable with class systems. Although, it's possible that Godwin would have celebrated the American Revolution. So maybe they would have been. But, a mayor of New York in the early 1800s could very well have some pro-labor sympathies. So I'm going to guess DeWitt Clinton.
It was Aaron Burr.
What was he doing there?
He was lying low.
Or was he on the run?
He was lying low.
He was on the run.
Yeah. He was. It was after the duel, and he needed to cool his heels for a few years.
He was a murderer.
Yeah. So he spent almost a couple years abroad in England and spent a big chunk of it. He was very close with the kids. They had like a pet name for him, like Mary Shelley called him Gamp or something like that.
That's amazing.
Just very, very, very odd crossover.
Yeah, I think that Burr would have been like probably in his 50s or 60s by then too. Because he was a young man during the Revolution. As I guess he and Hamilton were roughly the same age, but the Revolution 76, 70 into the, so we're talking at least 25 years later.
Yeah.
Wow. I had no idea. That was a great question.
What a wild coincidence. I was like, what?
I should have guessed Aaron Burr because then I could have reenacted the Got Milk commercial from the 90s. Aaron Burr.
That was I was like, should I put that as the epithet? Should I do Aaron Burr, third vice president of the United States and star of the Great Got Milk conversation?
Got Milk. Yeah.
Yeah. And just leaving out the fact that he killed.
That's such a great commercial.
It's amazing.
There's a moment in that commercial where the guy's got the peanut butter in his mouth and the question is asked and he looks over to his wall and there's a portrait, a painting of Aaron Burr and Hamilton dueling.
It's great. It's like that ad is amazing. It's I won't say that we won't see It's Like again, but because there are amazing ads that do come out all the time.
But yeah, like who came up with that? Like, okay, we're selling milk.
Mm-hmm.
What's an angle nobody's taken with milk before?
Right.
Well, sometimes you need milk to get peanut butter out of your mouth. Why would you need to get peanut butter out of your mouth?
Because you're calling a radio show to enter a competition. Because you're calling a radio show
to enter a competition. What would the competition be? Trivia. Well, and just like, what should the trivia question be? Who killed Alexander Hamilton? And this guy's a Hamilton expert. And he has a painting of Aaron Burr. It's just amazing.
It's such an incredible piece of work. The great ads are like that. It's like 30 seconds of like genius.
Yeah. I think the other one to me that always comes to mind is the language. It's like Berlitz or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking about?
Yes.
Do you remember that one?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so where do we go from here?
Where do we go from? Well, I'll tell you where we're going to go from here, but first we need to know if we're going to read the book again.
I don't think I'm going to read this book again.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think I will either. I am glad that I read it because I think it's important in the history of novels. I didn't find it super enjoyable to read, even though there are moments that I find very admirable. But it's not a book that I found that read easy.
Yeah.
And many of the books we read, I genuinely enjoy, even as I admire them. And this one was kind of more like, pushing a lawnmower.
Yeah.
You got to do it. And you like how the lawn looks when you're done.
Yeah. I didn't recall. It was tedious to me, and I didn't recall that from when I read it in college, and I don't know why. I think maybe maybe when we talked about it, we focused more sort of the way that we are on what the creation said and, and just the relationship between. But boy, the first 100 pages should be 20.
Yeah. I could see maybe reading the original edition out of curiosity at some point, but not right away. Mm-hmm. I kind of need a palate cleanser.
And what palate cleanser shall we turn to, Jesse?
Oh my God, we're so exciting. We're coming up on our next series, which is the three-body series. The 3 novels. Technically, I believe the series is called Remembrance of Earth's Past.
No way. It's a Proust illusion? What?
I think so.
That's amazing. Way to go.
Is it Remembrance? Maybe I'm getting Earth. Yeah. It's Remembrance of Earth's Past.
Oh my God, it's just one word different.
Yeah, no, it's very, very, it's very specific.
Yeah.
It's often referred to as the three-body problem series, the three-body series. And the first novel is the three-body problem. The writer is Cixin Liu. I read these books about 5 years ago, and I loved them.
Yeah.
And I would say probably the best sci-fi trilogy I've ever read. I'm trying to think if there's... I don't like a lot of sci-fi trilogies. Mm-hmm. I generally find that you often get one good book and then some more stuff.
Yep.
I did enjoy reading the Foundation trilogy as a teenager. But I think this is the best one that I've read. And you have not read any of these books.
Yeah, I'm really excited to I haven't read them. I've stayed away from watching the series because I know we're going to read it. And
great.
Yeah, I'm very excited to
And there are 2 series. There's a Chinese series and there's an American series. And the American series was made by Benioff and Weiss, same people who made Game of Thrones.
Oh, wow.
And has a lot of the same actors. Like, I know that Jonathan Pryce is in it, and the guy who played Sam, I don't remember that actor's name.
Oh, right, Sam Tarley. Jeez, yeah.
Sam, a very clear homage to Sam from The Lord of the Rings. Yep. A very, very, very similar character. Well, I'm really excited about that book. In fact, when we read the credits, we should look at where it is on the calendar. And it is a dense book, so it might. Hopefully, we've got 2 weeks or so. Although it's not super long, but it is. I will say, reader, and to Chris Bagg. Now that I know the book, it reads very, very quickly, but the first 100 pages or so can be a little bit disorienting. And one of the things I would strongly recommend would be kind of keeping a chart of the characters' names, or even cheating a little bit and like creating, using the internet to give you a chart of the characters' names. Three-body problem is next. We're going to fill that hole. And I will just say that Upper Middlebrow is a small point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are keeping this ship on course no matter what the crew thinks.
Oh, God.
Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Reich. Find us on Patreon, where there are a number of tiers at which you could show your support for our show and help us pay the bills.
And as a reminder, everybody, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, and we would love to help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Onward towards the North Pole.
Yep.
Light a fire.
Don't create stuff.